You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Wood.
And I'm Jennifer Connor.
From Equestrian Businesswomen, and you're listening to Equestrian B2B, the podcast that brings together industry leaders, entrepreneurs, and equestrians for conversations about how they build and sustain a successful business.
On today's show, we speak with Dr. Bridgett McIntosh about her life in academia, transitioning to a corporate role, and why collaboration is so important.
Dr. Bridgett McIntosh, Director of Mars Equestrian and lifelong equestrian, brings a unique perspective to educational and business opportunities for equestrian businesswomen with her diverse academic and corporate background. Growing up in rural upstate New York, Bridgett had a pony from day one and began showing hunter jumpers at 8 years old. She first embraced the important role women play in the horse industry as an undergraduate at Hollins University, a women's college in Roanoke, Virginia, where she was a member of the IHSA team and received a BA in biology. Blending her passion for horses with science, she received her master's and PhD in equine nutrition from Virginia Tech. She dedicated the next 15 years of her career to education and research as a faculty member at the University of Tennessee and Virginia Tech, where she made measurable impacts on improving horse health, environmental stewardship, and women's role in agriculture. She has worked extensively across private and public agencies, universities, and scientific disciplines, building collaborative relationships to promote and connect those involved in the horse industry.
Bridgett joined Mars Incorporated to head up their recently launched Mars Equestrian sponsorship team in 2018, translating her equine background to connecting the equestrian community with Mars Incorporated's iconic brands. Joining the Mars Equestrian team brought her career full circle, as her graduate training nearly 20 years ago was made possible by a fellowship to study nutrition and horse health with funding provided by Mars Waltham Center for Pet Nutrition. From meaningful partnerships across all disciplines to launching new Mars Equestrian fellowships supporting education and research, Bridgett's role is to extend the business-wide commitment to creating a better world for horses, pets, and the people who love them. Always striving for balance, Bridgett continues to compete in the hunter jumpers, fox hunt, and enjoys her farm with a myriad of animals in Virginia.
Hi, Bridgett. We're really excited to have you on the podcast today and talk to you. We've known each other for a few years now, and it's been great getting to know you in person at our events and have your support as well. So we're really looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, me too. Thank you guys both so much for having me. And I guess I'll start by saying I'm usually not very comfortable talking about myself. So it's taken me a while to agree to do this probably. But I think at the very end of the day, I just hope something I say or somebody listening will hear my story and realize that the plan you think is going to be your plan doesn't always work out, but it's usually because there's a better plan that whether the universe or whoever it is has for us, that we just have to trust getting there. And I think for me, my connection to horses led me on this path, connecting me with a lot of great mentors and people, mostly women really, who got me to where I am. And I'm just really grateful for that and grateful for you guys for having me on to talk about it.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's great. And I love the fact that you grew up in rural upstate New York. So I wanted to start there and talk about that a little bit because that's where I'm from. And I wanted to hear what your experience is growing up in upstate New York.
Well, some of them I can probably share, some I can't. Since you're from upstate New York. But yeah, so I grew up in a largely farming, agricultural family, dairy farming background largely. But my family, horses were part of the fabric of our life and our culture forever, not necessarily show horses or what I'm involved with as much now, but just a part of our life. My parents, my grandparents had horses, my aunts, my grandfather actually had harness racing horses, which I think we have in common.
Yeah.
Jen. But, I laugh because I was talking to my mom about this interview the other day, and she's obviously been a very influential person in my life. I think my love of horses really probably came from my dad. So when I was an infant, not home from the hospital, after, I don't know, probably a couple months old, if even, I got sick, and my mom was upstate New York, up on the hill behind the farm, picking blackberries. And I was a baby and I got sick, and my dad didn't know what to do. It's upstate New York. You can't get there on a vehicle. So he saddled up our quarter horse, Whiskers, and took me as a baby up to see my mom where she was picking blackberries. So I was literally riding horses before I could talk, before I could walk. So that's how much horses were a part of our life and lifestyle. My grandmother was a huge thoroughbred racehorse enthusiast. So really just a fabric of our life. I got my first pony when I was, I don't know, less than maybe 4 years old. And my parents couldn't find me. I'd be bareback with a halter and lead rope running around the house, or occasionally went on my own little trail ride over to my grandparents' house and no one knew where I was. So, they definitely taught me a lot, and I was hooked from that point forward. We had a menagerie, everything from miniature donkeys, miniature horses, draft horses, off the track thoroughbreds, harness horses. I would kind of ride and love everything, and owe so much of where I am today because of that love for horses.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I grew up on a farm. We had some pigs and we had a cow at one point. Everything always got loose when my dad was away from home and my mom had to chase him down the road every time, the most inconvenient times. But it's great to be able to grow up in that kind of environment. I rode my pony down to my grandparents' house just about every day because my grandfather set up a jumping field for us. And then we'd ride back home and put them away. And so it's a pretty great childhood. Like, I don't regret any of that.
Me either. I don't. And I think when I was probably 7 years old, my parents realized this was more than just my sister was a little older, and I would have her go to the high school library and get every book on horses, right? Everything, whether it was like science, and I would just read it and absorb it. And I was obsessed with it. I mean, they couldn't get me out of the barn and away from this love for it. So they finally agreed to give me riding lessons. They first took me to a saddlebred Morgan saddle seat type farm, which was more local. And they said I was too young. They weren't working with kids that young. So then my dad had a friend whose wife had a barn in Oneonta, New York. Yep. It was called Pine Ridge back then, but now it's called Hunter's Reign. Mm-hmm. And they were like, sure, bring the kid on. And I was so serious about it and such a little perfectionist and so absorbed in it. So I started riding. They had ponies for me to ride, lease kind of situation. And I started showing when I was 8 and never looked back. And I look back on that experience, and it was, I think, different than what I see today. It was, I loved the riding and the lessons, but it was, we worked in the barn. We learned to clean the stalls. We were grooming. We cleaned the tack. In some cases, I think we weren't even allowed to have a lesson unless you could fully take the bridle apart, clean it properly, and put it back together.
Probably so blindfolded too, right?
Yes. Yeah. It was all of those things. Of course, it was the pony and the horse, but it was this community and culture of friends. Many of those friends that I'm still friends with today, which led me to where I am. And that just, even horses at home. Christmas morning, I remember all I wanted one year was a new saddle. I didn't care about anything else. I just wanted a new saddle. And I opened all my presents and there was no saddle. And I physically got sick to the point where I was sick on Christmas. And then my mom was told my dad, you've got to go get the saddle. So he's like, oh, Santa found this in the driveway. And I was forever okay after that. Still got that saddle. But it was just, I just lived and breathed it and, didn't really ever want to do anything else except for be around horses in some way.
That's cool. And what did you want to do when you grew up? Was that did you want to be a rider and a trainer? And was that the goal, and were horses always part of the plan?
It's a good question about whether or not horses were part of the plan and in what way. This was the 70s and 80s when I was riding. And I was always a pretty keen academic student too. And I played sports, I played soccer. I grew up right on the Delaware River. So nature and conservation, skiing was always a part of my family, like being outdoors. So when I kind of got through high school, I was still showing. I knew horses would be a part of it. I just didn't know how. And I was at a small public school where we had a good guidance counselor, but no one really said these, like, you'd be a veterinarian or a trainer, right? Like I didn't really know what my options were. And that actually came much later, and I'll get to that. So I guess when I decided I wanted to go, I knew I was going to go to college. I had two interests: science, biology, environmental science, and I wanted to ride horses. I wasn't sure what kind of job other than being a veterinarian could lead to keeping horses in my life. So I was lucky in that a good friend of mine who was a couple years older that I rode with, and you guys may have met or even chatted with her, Kristen Nesbitt Salon, and she rides with Alan Lohman now. She's a hand surgeon, orthopedic surgeon now.
Wow.
But anyway, she was a few years older than me and invited me to come down to Lynchburg College to visit her when I was, I guess, a sophomore or junior in high school. And she was on the IHSA team. I didn't really know what that was at the time, but I was like, wait, I can go to Virginia, which is horse country. I can study biology, maybe even play soccer and ride horses. This is amazing. So I visited multiple colleges in Virginia, and also knew Virginia is where I wanted to be. The Blue Ridge Mountains, the outdoor activities really spoke to me and my love for nature and the environment, and in addition to being around horses. So I visited several colleges, but Hollins College, I walked onto campus, immediately felt at home. I walked into the barn. At that time, Nancy Peterson was the head of the riding program, Liz Corder and Elise Roshen. And it was like I just walked into where I always belonged. They were just so welcoming. The horses are right there on campus, and I just knew. And then I met the biology department, these amazing women faculty members that just really enveloped me. And they were horse faculty, they were biology and ornithology, which I do have an aside interest in birds and ornithology.
Huh.
So this kind of goes into your next question, but I never intended to go to graduate school for horses. I didn't even know that was a thing other than vet school. I was doing more work in environmental science and environmental studies, and doing some undergraduate research with birds and habitat loss for birds.
Wow.
Totally random, right? But I was still riding. I was on the IHSA team, which gave me so many opportunities to, quite frankly, ride nicer horses than I ever got to ride at home, because my family did the best they could. I had like amazing horses growing up to show, but I was getting to ride these like amazing horses that have been donated, getting to do the equitation medal finals and the adult hunters. And, it was just an amazing experience. So anyway, I initially was going to go to Virginia Tech to study something with biology or environmental science, because I knew vet school wasn't for me after doing some different internships with, I just saw sick animals all the time. And it's like, this isn't really my thing. And so I met a professor who was doing research with habitat loss and how it affected scrub jay populations. And I was like, this is my life. And I was in Florida. So I'm like, I can still ride, I can do this. Well, graduate school was so much dependent on funding, and that funding fell through. So then he didn't have the money to take me onto his lab. So I was in Blacksburg at the time. I did have a horse there too, and was helping out at another barn where a professor in animal and poultry sciences, Nancy Jack's horse, was there. Her husband managed one of the horse farms at Virginia Tech. And she said, you should really meet David Kronfeld. He runs the graduate equine nutrition program at Virginia Tech. There's a big research center in Middleburg, Virginia. And I had no idea that you could do a master's degree or a PhD in equine nutrition and physiology that wasn't vet school, right?
Right.
It was research. I didn't know that existed. And it was all just happenstance, but again, through horses that connected me to this opportunity. So I went to meet with Dr. Kronfeld, and he kind of looked at me, and, I was wearing like cutoff shorts and a t-shirt in this fancy academic building. And he was immediately, I think, struck too by my passion for horses and what I wanted to do with my life at that point. Is I was like, I think, I didn't even know this existed, but what can I do with this? And he talked about different opportunities, managing farms, going into extension, a pharmaceutical company, different job kind of things opened up to me. But he said, I'm not going to take you as a student right away because you don't have the traditional academic background to get into animal science program. I'd never taken like an animal production class. Everything I took was more like biology, physics, chemistry. So anyway, he said, if you take these 3 classes, and I think it was like animal nutrition, statistics, and biochemistry, and you get A's, you're in. You're going to be my student. So I worked at a coffee shop, and I took these 3 classes, and I got A's, and he took me on as his student. So I started my master's degree. I spent a year on campus, the way that program works, and then got to live a year in Middleburg, Virginia, which is, horse country. It's, where I long to be, and part of the reason I wanted to be in Virginia. My work there is where I got introduced to Mars. So my master's research was the digestibility of rice bran in horse feeds and horse diets, because at that time, we weren't really feeding high fat fiber diets like we know is important today. But Mars helped fund that research and owned Ben's Rice, then Uncle Ben's Rice, which is where my rice bran came from.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, wow.
So kind of an interesting story.
Yeah.
So my first knowledge of Mars was getting funding to have this opportunity, which I could not have afforded had Mars and Virginia Tech not funded me as a master's student, but also doing this very practical research that then went right into, as we know, how a lot of horse feed is made and how we're feeding performance horses today. So at that point, I said, well, I want to manage a barn. I do not want to do a PhD. I'm not happy in a lab pipetting all day. I need to be out in nature and doing applied work. Because the Mare Center was very much focused on pasture-based nutrition. We did a lot of environmental conservation work. It was a thoroughbred breeding farm as well. So we were foaling out mares and then doing growth studies. I mean, it was just what I got exposed to there was just really amazing. So I don't know if you want me to keep going or you have a question about that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And
yeah, go ahead.
I actually almost went to Hollins as well. My trainer went to Hollins. It was my second choice for school, but same thing. Yeah. When I went on the campus, I was like, oh, this is really nice. And Virginia really appealed to me. But then I was like, I decided I wanted the giant university experience and went to South Carolina. But yeah.
Thankfully you did.
I know. Otherwise we wouldn't have met.
Exactly.
And
Bridgett, when did you decide to go ahead with the PhD?
I did want to go back to that general question. So yeah, I never imagined myself wanting to go to a women's college as well. I will say that.
Me too.
And I was really like, what am I doing? And I thought about after my first year transferring to UVM, actually got in. So like, I think I was more homesick that freshman year. I loved riding. I loved it all. I was like 18 and like, didn't know what I wanted to do. But anyway, I have to say that women's education is something that I am very passionate about now because it helped me grow and develop, and not that I was nurturing and that it was coddling, but I think women learn and interact differently in a female setting than when I, later went to Virginia Tech and was teaching. That I look back now and I'm so proud that I got to be a part of that women's education, because I do think it did help shape my confidence. I don't think I was always the most confident coming out of a small town high school. And going to Holland's really nurtured my confidence and helped me bring out who I really am. So I know that's not what this podcast is, but I wanted to.
No, that's cool though.
And we actually get feedback a lot from like our working groups that women appreciate that it's women in the room, and they feel like, they can share more because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really was. And you were, I don't know, just less distractions and closer bonds. I mean, so many of my friends today are my friends from Holland's that we're still such a close knit group of friends. So, and mostly riders. So there's that too, or somehow in the business. So yeah, so how did I get into doing a PhD, which I had originally? And I'll be honest, like I never really saw myself. You see like PhDs and you think they're like, super geniuses. And I'm academically studious. I work hard. But what graduate school also taught me, I think, is what I learned from horses. It's hard work, dedication. You roll your sleeves up. You're not afraid of hard work. And that's what graduate school is. If you really love something and put your mind to it, you'll succeed at it.
It's achievable.
It's achievable. Yes. It's not always just like, how did you do well on this standardized test? It's where's your passion going to drive you to work hard and to stay focused and put in a lot of sweat and tears, really. So I did learn that in grad school, which I attribute to growing up in an agricultural farming family and horses.
Yeah.
Horses teach you, they humble you, right? So, so at the time when I did my master's, my idea was to go back and like manage a farm. And I liked it. I learned a lot from it. I don't regret doing it. I probably would have kept doing it to some extent. It didn't pay very well monetarily, but I got to go on horses every day. So there's that. But my PhD advisor called me out of the blue, I guess a year and a half or 2 years after my master's. So I wasn't a traditional undergrad to master's to PhD. I had about a year and a half or 2 years in between each of these where I was.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah.
And that's what I said at the beginning, like this was not my plan. My paths just kind of took me there, and I always kind of was led by my heart and horses and the connections I made with mentor. Dr. Kronfeld rang me up and said, I've got some funding. We want to do this pretty big comprehensive study with laminitis and ponies. And it really ties in with pasture and pasture management and the environment and understanding why some ponies are getting laminitis and some aren't. This is all public knowledge now, so I can say this, but it was at Farnley Farm in Virginia, because they've been importing these ponies for over 100 years. Like, why and he knew too, my background in showing ponies and hunters, that I had this strong interest in laminitis and ponies too. So I think he was like, horse show meets pasture, applied research, and he said, would you consider coming back to do a PhD? I'd like you to do a PhD with me. So it didn't take me I was actually fishing with a horse in a river.
Really?
In Charlottesville. I got this phone call. So not your typical environment, but so it was a paid scholarship. So when you do graduate work, you get a stipend. They pay for everything. So you're getting paid to go to graduate school.
Wow.
Also, something I didn't know in undergrad or high school, that this was an option, because I looked at vet school and I'd be like, how many hundreds of thousands would I be in debt to do this? Well, doing a master's and a PhD, it was fully funded. So I got housing, I got a stipend, plus my tuition was paid.
Wow.
So it was a no-brainer, right? To go back and do and I knew doing that, it was just me. It just fit. So I moved back to Blacksburg, did my coursework for a year, then was back up in Middleburg for 2 years. My PhD research was understanding the seasonal and circadian daily variations in pasture non-structural carbohydrates and how that affects the grazing horse's physiology. So now we know endocrine dysfunction and all those types of disorders and diseases that are so commonly talked about today. But this was in 1999, 2000 that my research started. So in that area before it was really we didn't really know what was going on. So we worked in all these very multidisciplinary teams between the ponies and then my studies. And I got my PhD. And through that was still getting to work on all these other cool, like reproduction, exercise physiology. And at that farm at Virginia Tech, the students run the farm. You're not just taking classes in a lab. You feed the horses. Horses are 24/7. You rotate weekends. We were foaling out mares. That's what I was saying. It's like very much about the hard work that goes into everything.
Right.
We were teaching classes still to undergrads, like we were working with the community. So a lot of experiences that aren't your traditional graduate school experience, I would say. So then what did I do after my PhD? So I worked for a few.
Where did you go?
I know. So I worked for it and I was like, oh, should I mention this? But I'm going to, because it's, like I said, no one knows. I did not want to be a professor. I did not want to stay in academia. I wanted to go into industry where I was working with horse owners and farms, and still a passion of mine. So I worked for a feed company for exactly 1 year because I was terrible at it. So I'm not going to lie, it was just not for me. I mean, here I am, spent the past 3 years doing a PhD studying obesity in horses and how most horses don't need these high sugar starch feeds, and our pastures are too high in sugar because they're made for dairy cattle. And I'm trying to sell horse feed.
Right.
It was great. And I learned so much. I mean, just the feed production side, the business side. And I was at a scientific conference, the Equine Science Society, presenting some of my research. And a gentleman at the time who'd been at the University of Tennessee said, we have an equine extension position open, and I think you'd be perfect. Would you consider applying for the job? Because I was still working for the feed company at this time. And I said yes, because I'd, for the past 5-6 years with my master's and PhD was being trained in basically an extension and research farm. So this job was entailing everything that I'd kind of experienced and loved to do. So I moved to Nashville, and it was for UT, University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And I was based in Nashville because I was the state equine specialist for the whole state. So while I had some duties to teach and do guest lectures, I taught some nutrition at the vet school, had some undergraduate interns, taught some nutrition in undergraduate classes. I was largely running the state 4-H horse program, which I had done 4-H as a kid too, so I had a familiarity with it, and really building a program for adult horse owners, the horse industry, on helping improve equine management practices across the state. They had somewhat of a program there, but it wasn't really well established. So I got to work with these government and non-government agencies to whether it was environmental funding or related to conservation, or different feed companies, other universities, in building equine education programs. We had a master horse owner course that I developed with a team and taught. I worked a lot with our biosystems engineering and environmental scientists on doing some different types of research with different forages you could plant and grasses you could plant in paddocks for high traffic areas. I had working with, and one of my previous colleagues who I had recommended, Dr. Amy Burke, she helped me replicate a best management practice farm. So it was a conservation BMP demo farm that we created in Spring Hill, Tennessee. Yeah. Where we could bring in people to the farm and show, this is how you compost manure. This is how you build a dry lot. This is how you do rotational grazing. This is what works. This is what doesn't work.
That's amazing.
Have you seen those replicated in different places around the country?
Yes and no. So Dr. Amy Burke is at the University of Maryland. But as you know, it's a different growing season. It's very different conditions than, like, we could grow a lot of warm season grasses in Nashville. So we were able to put in some really true warm season grass, heavy use areas, and just do some different things. And then our thought was that moving down, we could like kind of do this collaborative research. And that's, an area I think at the end, you guys asked for a question about what can women do. And I think collaboration, one thing I learned in the university system is everybody's competing for funding.
Yeah.
And what I've learned in moving forward is that the more you work together and cross-pollinate and share ideas, the more successful everybody is together. And Amy was really great about that. So we work to kind of, right, this is what I'm finding in my research or our growing season compared to what you're finding. And, we just really helped each other. And I know Rutgers University has done some, but I don't know of any other formal. There might be. I'm just not aware of any other formal. This was like a conservation BMP demonstration farm.
Oh, wow.
Where people could we had different types of fencing. So like people could look at different types of fencing, like this is what this costs, this are the pros and cons to this. So it was just a nice demonstration where people could see hands-on how things work. And it was geared towards small acreage farming, which is really important, I think, at this day and age with horse farms. So it's all very hands-on and practical and working a lot with the community, and really loved that.
What a great idea. I haven't heard of that before as like a state-run institution. But I mean, I haven't, it's not like I'm looking for it. So
yeah, right.
But I love the idea of it, and that, for people who do want to build their own can go and find what would work best for the land that they have and the types of horses and what they want to do with it. That's cool.
Yeah, we even had these, we tested out manure vacuums for manure removal.
Oh,
so they're like this little thing that you pull behind a little tractor or lawnmower to suck up the manure.
Yeah.
And it didn't work that well. So that company's like the same. If it was fescue-based pasture and the grass got tall, you could not get it all up.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of trial and error, but it was great. I mean, and that was very cross-departmental. We had environmental scientists, all these different people that were part of that project. So I learned a lot for sure doing that. And, I didn't mention, so even though my PhD research and all of that wasn't really anything to do with horse feed or a business ROI, I was a Mars Waltham Fellow, and they helped fund my PhD research as well.
Okay. So it transferred from master's to PhD. That's awesome.
Yeah. I later got a Pratt Fellow, which isn't Mars. It's a separate fellowship for funding, but Mars 100% was behind funding a lot of my research still, doing those grazing studies. And to me, it's just a testament of the Mars family and the Mars business truly wanting to give back and, help support people like me, young scientists that are interested in horses, that ultimately, I know it sounds like cliche, but a better world for horses. And I was really lucky and grateful to be a part of that, and wouldn't be here today without it. So I wanted to mention that. What made me think of that is because when I went to the University of Tennessee, funding is a big issue. Where do you get funding? I had, how many horses did we have there? 8. Well, they still have to eat and they have to have hay and all these things. So I did reach back out to Mars Horse Care, and they helped supply feed and support my program as a new faculty member at the University of Tennessee as well, with Buckeye Nutrition and Mars Horse Care. And Pat Harris, who had been on my committee at Virginia Tech, was helping me still. So again, just these networks of mentors and just reaching out for help and getting ideas and everybody coming together to help each other. It was very supportive. And I loved Tennessee. I got tenure, because I was a tenure track professor, which is a really big deal in academia. And then I got a phone call that Virginia Tech was looking for somebody to go back to Middleburg, specifically to the Mayer Center, to create and develop extension programs and re-envision the programs back in Middleburg, where I had been trained for my master's and PhD. And so not only did I feel like I owed, not that this was Mars related specifically, but I owed so much of my career at that point to Virginia Tech and the Mayer Center and David Kronfeld, who had gotten me to where I was. And I just loved Middleburg. I'm from upstate New York. It's closer to my family. So I had a long heart to heart with my department head at Tennessee and my colleagues there. We were like family. I loved it. But at the end of the day, for my career, there were some opportunities at Virginia Tech, including funding for graduate students, which I didn't have at Tennessee. I was able to do research, but I didn't have funding for my own graduate research program.
Okay. So you could bring in students of your own and help them along.
Right. Right. And there was a package to help me get started on the research and extension program. And again, it's Middleburg, it's Virginia. It's where my heart was. It's closer to my family in New York. So I made the difficult decision after 8 years or so at Tennessee to go back to Virginia Tech. And then I was the state extension specialist for Virginia Tech, and developed an applied graduate research program there. I carried on a summer internship program with the part of it with the British Equestrian Federation that my predecessor, Rebecca Spillane, had done, which was kind of this, multicultural, global perspective on bringing, as we know, the horse industry differs so much in the UK from the US. So very hands-on. So I had a summer internship program plus graduate students that I was building at Virginia Tech at that time. And was really proud. We did a lot of really neat grazing studies, looking at different types of turf grasses and native grasses, which was research I always wanted to do at Tennessee and never quite got the funding for. And we were able to do some of this research on native plants at Virginia Tech, just from a biodiversity standpoint, tying back in my environmental interest. So I'm really proud of what we did there too. And wasn't really planning on leaving there. And then I found out, but again, funding is the hardest thing in academia. Is there isn't a lot of research funding out there for the equine industry. You're really, and maybe that's what makes it so hard sometimes to build collaborations, is you're just, everybody's kind of vying for the same pool of money.
Yeah.
And while I loved it, it was really challenging because I felt like I couldn't always focus on what was important, which was the students, the research, the education, because you're writing grants and just trying to get all the money you can to support doing this work that you love and care about so much. So that I'd say that was like a challenge in being in academia, and Mars was still supporting and funding and providing all the feed with Buckeye Nutrition, my program at Virginia Tech. So again, still had these connections and ties in with Mars just from they're so willing and generous and they're supporting my students too, just because it's the right thing to do. So then when I found out Mars Equestrian was being developed and launched, I had some really wonderful women in the community that said, Bridgett, we think you'd be perfect for this job. Now, mind you, it was a marketing position. And I was like not trained in marketing whatsoever, other than so much of what we do is marketing, right?
Yeah.
If it's natural and it's a passion and it's inherent, you're just sharing information that to create awareness and help people, right?
Right.
That's how I saw it.
So as you started to work for Mars, like what was that transition like, going from academia into a corporate setting?
No, it's a great question. And it's something, my answer might be different than other people that go from academia to corporate, because Mars is so different as a corporation. It's family owned. The culture is different. It's truly, based on these principles. Like, for example, you're an associate, you're not an employee. So it's very much, it's a family owned business. Mars Equestrian while it is the business, we work very closely with the Mars family who owns the business.
Okay.
So we have a lot of, I would say, we had a lot of freedom to create and build this Mars Equestrian program from literally a white blank page, because Mars Equestrian didn't exist before 2018. This is when I started that position. So they knew that Mars had been involved in the horse industry from a personal level across different Mars family members, and from a business standpoint with Buckeye Nutrition here in the US and Spillers in the UK with horse feed. And I think my familiarity with Mars, because of my past training made it was, I mean, honestly, just a natural, I felt like I was kind of doing the same job, but for Mars instead of the university. So I was like, look, we have Mars is funding all this research and education, while Mars Equestrian can be sponsoring events and this marketing branch to get brand awareness out there of who Mars Incorporated is. A very meaningful, thoughtful, and impactful way to do this that's going to help the horse industry is also to continue funding these types of research and education programs that got me to where I am. So, the biggest difference is, it's hard to say, like they're really, we have a little bit more structure, I would say. There's expectations to have an ROI for the business. I had, a learning curve to learn what the business is. Mars Incorporated is this huge global, portfolio of brands, everything from Snickers and Twix and M&Ms, FLM, to our pet food business and pet veterinary business, where, again, an easy transition for me because pets are truly a part of your life at Mars. Most of the offices, pets are allowed in the office, and offices are pet friendly. And then we had our veterinary side. So within a year or two, when I started this role, Mars acquired Sound and Antech, which are diagnostics and imaging equipment for horses, which I was familiar with from my previous work in academia. So to be able to move into Mars and into Mars, Incorporated from an academia role, it was bringing this whole portfolio of brands and products and businesses that perfectly meshed with the horse industry and what I grew up in. So it translated very easily, I would say, and very well, to the point where today, even though it might be like a Mars Equestrian sponsored event, the on-staff veterinarians and the veterinary hospitals are being supported by our veterinary business and their equipment and their scientists. So it's really just been a natural evolution for me. And I guess it goes back to the beginning where no one could have ever said 15, 20 years ago, do you think you're going to be working for Mars Incorporated in this type of a role? It didn't even exist then. So how would you know? And I think that's where, for me, it just goes back to, you follow your heart, you follow your love for horses and the things that, for me, the environment and conservation and nature. And it just kind of gets you down this path and these turns where you're meant to be. So I don't know if that answers your question very well. But.
Well, what's your day-to-day look like?
Oh gosh, my day-to-day now that's where I would say there's a difference between corporate and academia, right? In academia, it was pretty structured. I have my students, you have your kind of teaching, research. Now my role is very much different because we've got our arm of Mars Equestrian is sponsoring events. So we have 32-ish events that we sponsor across all these different disciplines. So eventing, hunter jumper, rein cow horse, all these different, because we care about horses at the end of the day, right? It's not about what kind of saddle you have, or it's about the horse that brings us all together. So part of my day might be, evaluating how we show up at an event and how we, our purpose, a better world for horses, pets, and the people who love them. How do we take that to an event? So things like, which brand of pet food or pet care do we take to an event where it's going to resonate with the people that are there? Or it's moderating a veterinary continuing education program, bringing back in my science background. So it's definitely different every day. And I love that about it. We have, like I said, a lot of freedom to guide where we are and what we do within the business. And we really do work across all the portfolios, from Mars snacking to pet care to science and diagnostics. We get to bring all of those things together. So one day I might be on a call with someone in Mars Wrigley or Mars Confectionery, and the next day I'm in a meeting with someone working with New Bolton Center on our veterinary research scholar program there and how we implement some of our veterinary equipment. So it's diverse.
Yeah.
Cool.
And, as you've kind of grown into this role and being a leader in it, how has that changed for you, and what does that look like, being a leader of a team?
No, that's a great question. And it's one I looked at, I look at it, I still don't I consider myself a teammate at the end of the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm a teammate, and yeah, you have a different responsibility. I'm like officially have, I'm a manager of a team, and I have to take myself. And I think this is advice for any leader. It's not about you.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the people on your team, and having the compassion, the heart, understanding where their goals are, where their careers want to go, and building them. And I'm only successful if my teammates and my team members are successful. So, I've had to learn. Mars has been pretty amazing at doing leadership trainings, which has helped guide me through a lot of this. And one program in particularly we looked at is just understanding people's differences in personality, and how you can use that, and how you're different, and how you perceive information, right? So being very empathetic and understanding of what's best for your team and your team members, and how you can be a better person to help guide them along on their journey of their career. Which, to be fair, is what I did as a professor when I was in academia too, is developing youth, developing students. Well, now I'm developing other professionals, but to be fair, they're developing me too. So I see it as very collaborative, and because I just never always, you come last to what your team is kind of the way I lead, is putting my teammates and my team members first.
We had someone come on for a podcast episode that talked about different negotiating styles. And I thought it was really fascinating, and you could apply it in lots of different situations of how you deal with people, whether you are truly negotiating, like with, and where the power imbalance lies. But I think it works as a leader of a team as well, and figuring out what it is that motivates people, and how to better work with them to get the best out of them in their job, and to make sure, yes, they're happy, but are they doing their best for the company, and giving what they can towards the job as well.
No, absolutely. Making, like, people want to feel valued, right? People want to know that, and everybody has value. Everybody has an amazing skill set, and it's just bringing that together. And, we've always kind of managed our team and led our team from the very beginning on, the sum is greater, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, right? So it takes all these different unique mindset, skills, backgrounds, to bring it together. And it's just, I feel like we get so much farther along when we work that way.
What piece of career advice can you give to women in the equine industry?
Or just work together. I mean, I think we have so much to learn from each other. And I think the horse industry is unique because while it is the horse that brings us all together, we have all these different disciplines and areas where we sometimes, I think, fall into the trap of, well, this is how I learned it, so this is the best way, which maybe it's not a wrong way to do something. It's just a different way to do it. So I think we always have things to learn from each other, and just collaboration. And, I don't know how else to say that. It's really just comes down to what you can learn from each other and collaborate and work together. And you're always going to achieve and accomplish more by bringing everybody's unique talents together to the team.
Is there something in particular that you'd like to see women accomplish in the equine industry?
I'd like to see women in more leadership roles in the industry. I think whether it's riding from the competitive standpoint, to the organizing bodies, to companies and corporations, universities, I think across the board, I think, and we know this is kind of a global perspective too, not just the equine industry. But when I looked at our equine departments in academia, we're largely, it's like 70, 80% women, young women that are interested in horses, but then the leadership roles are still tending to be held by men. And not that men are good leaders too, but it would just be nice, like we went back to, like, having more balance, different perspectives.
Right.
And so I'd like to see if there's one thing I could see as a change or see as a evolution in the industry as more women in leadership roles.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
And we are working, and we've got this year is our third year doing a veterinary research scholar at the University of Pennsylvania New Bolton Center. Now we've expanded that with the Royal Vet College of London. So really trying to build and empower young female, it doesn't have to be a female, but this happens to be, both of them are females that we've had, just empowering them to develop their research and clinical skills outside of their everyday veterinary practice. And then we've got another program with the University of Kentucky that's very much like what I and Amy Burke, who I'll recommend, were brought along by, is these PhD programs that are funding scholars and just giving them more experience and opening their eyes to their careers. So there's a little bit in the weeds, but thought I'd include that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Well, it's been a real pleasure speaking with you, learning more about you. And at the end of each episode, we ask the same 4 questions to the guests, and Connor starts with the first.
What is one action that women can take to make a big difference in their lives?
I had to think long and hard about this one because I was like, oh, one action, there's so many. But I think it goes back to just collaborate with each other, work with each other. We're not competing each other. The more we work together, the more we'll achieve. Kind of going back to that, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
And what is the best habit that keeps you motivated personally?
Well, I wanted to say something like exercise or yoga, but I'm not great at that. It's like what I plan to do, but hardly do. I think it's always trying to do my best and recognizing that some days my best is not as good as other days. Mm-hmm. If I don't get a good night's sleep or, I've got other stresses, but just always trying to do my best and giving myself a little grace that some days my best isn't as good as other days.
Yeah.
What's your favorite horse movie?
Oh,
The Horse in the Gray Flannel Suit, hands down.
That's a good movie.
Still have it on VHS.
But do you have a VHS player?
I actually do.
Do you? Yes. I have all these VHS tapes in my living room, and then I don't have anything to play them on.
I know. I've actually got some right here.
That's amazing. I need to get all mine converted. I have all my old tapes of me riding my pony that I want to be able to watch.
That's what these are.
I think my uncle or somebody started doing that for me, and I don't know whatever happened to the process of it.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny to look back at our helmets and the evolution of helmets through the years.
Totally. And who would you recommend to be a future guest on this podcast?
I think Dr. Amy Burke at the University of Maryland. I alluded to her a couple times. She's was a mentor to me through graduate school. Speaking of women in leadership, she's now heads up the undergraduate program at the University of Maryland, and is just, I think, would have a lot to offer to other women and in the horse industry. Have great perspective.
Yeah, that would be great. We'd love to talk to her.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, thanks so much again.
Yeah, thank you guys both so much. It was an honor and an honor to work alongside such accomplished women like you. So thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey, Equestrian B2B podcast listeners. Ready to level up your biz?
Ride Every Stride specializes in tailoring brand identities for equestrian businesses. From logo development, essential stable accessories, and custom product branding to exclusive awards, VIP event must-haves, and chic apparel, they've got you covered.
Visit rideeverystride.com. Use code B2B15, that's B2B15, at checkout for an exclusive 15% discount.
Elevate your brand with Ride Every Stride, supporting women in business and equestrian excellence.
I thought it was great hearing from Bridgett about her educational background. And I kind of forgot that she had her PhD until we started talking, and I was like, oh yeah, she's a doctorate and she's super smart. And obviously, that comes out anytime you talk to her, but it was cool to hear what she worked on and how she was able to do so much in that field.
And I loved how she started out the podcast saying that it wasn't exactly the path that she thought she was going to go down,
Right.
and how it's like changed and evolved. And, what she thought what she thought she wanted to do, and then what she ended up doing, and how that didn't even exist when she first started going to school and going through it all. It's really it's eye-opening. And I also really felt a connection with her over talking about the part where in high school, her guidance counselor didn't really give her a lot of help in what to do and where to go. And, I also grew up in rural upstate New York, and I feel like, yeah, that's your choice. Oh, do you want to be a vet? Oh, do you want to, be a doctor or a lawyer? And we've talked about that a little bit before, but I was like, I felt where she was coming from in that. And, it was cool to see her kind of go and then find this unique path and see where she's at now.
Right. And even looking at biology and equine nutrition, it's fascinating to hear how she took that education into the jobs that she had at universities, and studying grass and and all of that, and how the different grasses were for different, were like, she mentioned most grass was made for dairy cows, not horses.
Yeah.
Which I've never even thought of before.
Right.
But yeah, all of that to say, I think it's really cool how she's been able to kind of translate that into what she's doing now at Mars Equestrian, and be able to use what Mars Equestrian does to help people like her and what she used to do in, the way that they have the grants and fellowships and supporting education and research. And it's really cool.
Yeah, it's super impactful, I think, on the equine industry. I also think that it's like, what better person to have kind of advocating for that and right. Being like an insider. She went through it. She knows the needs. And obviously she's excited about the industry growing and information and research that's going to help us. And ultimately it helps the horses. And I love that about her, that she's really, in it for the love of the horses. And that's, a driver behind it.
Yeah. But she also sees it from the science side. She sees it from the research side and from the sports side, because she shows horses, you know, like she understands what a sport horse needs too. So
yeah, it all kind of collides. It's super cool. I really identified with her when she was talking about when she worked for the feed company and she was there for like exactly 1 year. I was like, hey, I've had a similar experience where you're like, okay, let me do this. And then it was not what you were expecting. And it was like 1 year exactly. So, and actually it did surprise me when she said she went to work for a feed company. In a way, I was like, oh, that, from doing all this like pasture-based research to then going into a feed company, that was super interesting, but really cool. I enjoyed listening to her talk about all of her transitions and being such an advocate for women.
Yes. And saying how much more we need to collaborate and share with each other, which I think we've been talking a lot about over our years with the podcast in terms of sharing resources and, calling on each other for help, or even down to like the people who've said, we should share what our pricing is so that,
Right.
we understand what the market is. And I really appreciated her support of that and calling it out.
Yeah, because it's super important, and it will push everybody forward as a collective if we can all share and contribute. And I always think about how the equine industry, it's a small industry, and we're all dipping into the same pot all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very similar to academia. They're looking at the same people to donate money to push programs forward. And so if there's a way for us to maximize the return for people who are doing donations or sponsorships, and by collaborating all together, I think that we can spread the message further.
Yeah. So great conversation.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was so good. And before I lose power again, because we have snow up here,
Oh, man.
and the weather's a little crappy and I didn't have power, we're going to wrap up the show today. You can find the links to today's guest and the show notes at www.eqbusinesswomen.com. Equestrian B2B is out twice a month on the 1st and the 15th.
You can find out more at eqbusinesswomen.com and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Find Equestrian B2B wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow, subscribe, and leave a review. You can have all 20 plus shows of the Horse Radio Network with you wherever you go with their free app for iPhone and Android. Go to your app store and search Horse Radio Network.
Now go collaborate and share.